Welcome
Welcome
to Modern Mind
Modern Mind
Ancient Book,
Ancient Book,
where we, together, explore one of the most important books in human history. Nick, welcome to another Modern Mind Ancient Book.
Hey, I'm glad to be here.
Today we have Pastor Pete Farkas of M1AG Church in Manning, South Carolina. Welcome, Pastor Pete.
Thank you.
Today we are going to be doing a survey of the book of Obadiah. And it's pronounced
Obadiah.
Yeah.
But I still want to say Obadiah.
So Obadiah is a minor prophet. It's of the writings collection in the Old Testament. The date is slightly challenging for this because there were 13 recorded Obadiahs in the Old Testament. One of the major arguments, and I think the one we're going to land on, and the reason why we're doing it at this particular stage in the podcast, is that the older date is the one we're going to land on, which was about 8:30 or something like that? It was previous to that. 840, actually. So, somewhere around 840, because it prophesied the invasion of Egypt, and that was about 926-ish. And there's a lot of other reasons why that is likely, but it's kind of the least important part of this book. Whether the date is earlier or later, I think all three of us in this room would agree that God can prophesy through his people. So we're not going to go with later, and it's a little bit too much to talk about for this particular version of the podcast. So the name Obadiah means, Pastor Pete, you got that over there? It's right in the title and authorship area.
It means servant of Yahweh.
Servant of Yahweh. And this particular Obadiah is identified as the chief officer of Ahab in 1 Kings chapter 18. And that means that he knew the prophet Elijah. So it was a powerful time. It was a time of extreme wickedness also in Israel.
Right.
And so the book, though, this book, its focus isn't on the same things that Elijah was focused on. This book has a very different focus to it. So Edom is the central focus of this book. And Nick, we just did one a little bit ago. Ruth was an Edomite.
Right.
So that was an interesting part.
Rather the redemption.
Of the book of Ruth, right? Bringing her in. And the fact that she became part of the line of Jesus. Yeah. Through Boaz's righteousness, Naomi's bitterness, the horrible experience they had, there came an Edomite who became an Israelite by denouncing her people and pronouncing via covenant language that her God would be the God of Israel, and that her people, that Naomi's people, would be her people. That was an interesting thing. So now
it's almost like this stuff ties together.
It ties together a whole lot. There's actually a lot more in this, which is quite interesting, and the reason why I wanted to focus on the historical background and why I also had sort of a complaint about who the recipients are or how to read it. So Esau was, Pastor Pete?
Esau?
Yeah. Is Jacob's brother. Son of Isaac, right?
Correct.
But not the son of promise.
Right.
It says, Jacob I loved, but Esau I've hated.
Which is a crazy thing to think about. We don't, a lot of times, like to assign something like that to our God.
Yeah.
That he would.
And it's interesting, too, because the thing that Esau did by our standards today, it'd be kind of like, hey, I know Mom said you could have this house, but just give it to me and I'll get you some Starbucks.
Yes.
And you were like, okay, dude, I love coffee, you know? So it's kind of like that. But it's in a culture that's very different than ours. It's not the same. And it's kind of a bad explanation.
Yeah.
But I think that's the way the modern mind tends to read that, right? Like it's not a big deal.
Yeah. And he gave into his fleshly desires for food instead of his long-term spiritual.
I think that's
immediate
that's
bodily desires.
The crux of the argument. That to Esau, his God was his stomach, right? It was his strength. It was his ability to hunt.
Yes.
He actually took on the image from Genesis of the Nephilim or the Gibborim, the men of old, the mighty hunters, right? And he's also, right, not that big of a deal because I like hunters. And in today's age, we certainly celebrate people who go to war, right? So, again, I think the modern mind might read this and go, what's the big deal with Esau? Why was it such a big deal, right? Like, he was just a kid, he was hungry, or whatever, right? It won't make a whole lot of sense.
Right.
But it does make a whole lot of sense. Because these people don't see natural and supernatural.
Right.
They see God in everything, in all ways, at all times. And life is about covenant framework.
Right.
And so Esau, being the firstborn, despised the covenant. He broke the covenant that was made with him. And in this book, well, in Genesis, your word and with whom you are known by, whose name you are known by, brings honor to your family, and your family is very religious, and so are you. But to the point where loving and living for God was every day of every moment and everything, and everything had wonder.
Right.
So it's not, and that's what I really want the podcast to convey, is that we today, we don't have the same wonder.
No.
And we don't have the same focus. We think of God as someone who shows up at church and who we pray to, but every other thing we do.
Right, and we've created that separation, like you were saying, that they didn't have. We consider it, there's the God things and the us things, and even if something isn't an us thing, it's somebody on this earth did it to us. They didn't have that artificial barrier.
There was no barrier at all. Everything was to God, for God, of God.
They're much more reliant on God than we are.
And lived within a covenant framework. I mean, I can't understate how essentially important this is. And this is the reason why I wanted to do this historical background in this, because the book of Obadiah, is all about that covenant framework. And so, Obadiah as a whole is a prophecy that Edom would be forever destroyed because they did not help Israel in her time of need, and instead they were going to stand in battle against their cousins.
And Israel's time of need was when they were coming out of Egypt.
Yeah. So here you have the story of Jacob and Esau. Now, did Jacob have problems? Yes, he did. But his God was not his stomach. He was a plotter, a schemer. He was more like the serpent.
Right.
He was more cunning. But he still lived and yearned for that covenant framework, which I think is very essential for proper biblical understanding, is to understand that yearning and need for covenant relationship and how it dominated everyday life. So here we go. We got that. And then we have in 2 Kings, in Exodus, Edom would not let Israel pass through the land.
Yes.
Right? And so Edom, there's all through 2 Kings, there's a bunch of run-ins with Edom, right? And then eventually this prophecy is given, but it starts with the relationship between Esau and Jacob. And this is not the first nor the last time we'll run across how these relationships come back and play in their ultimate, either their end or their restoration. Herod the Great was part Edomite, right? A survivor. And he tried to kill he did kill the firstborn. under 2 years old or whatever, right? So just very difficult people who followed after Esau. So this is why Edom was judged. So Esau had character problems where he was about his strength,
Right.
and that turned into a nation. The Edomites lived in what is Petra in the mountains.
Right.
They had very narrow passes. They could very easily defend their land. They were a very strong people. They did not think that they could be conquered. But this says, oh yes. And not only will you be conquered, you'll be conquered for good. Okay, so cousins fought. That's the gist of that one. So the first recipients would be Israelites who had been driven out of Judea and possibly other parts of Israel by an invading army. The locusts and all that kind of thing were part of this, right? So they're living in fear and probably outside of their home, and they're displaced by war. Many times has this happened
Right.
to Israel. It's been, I feel like 7 times or so, right? And that process, that's what makes the music sad, right? We were listening to minors and augmented, chords.
Well, and it's often in minor anyway, but some of those, they paired things together without getting too nerdy, that just tug on the heartstrings in a way that we now can actually measure.
Yeah.
They figured that out either through revelation or through trial and error, because there's no record of them knowing what they're
like. I feel like technology is magic in the Bible.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like human innovation, capability. I think people just saw it as more wondrous than we do today. I mean, in large part, I would say people today have really lost their imagination. Because Hebrew as a language, for instance, is a picture in a word. Right? And now Greek is very technical, and it's very scholarly. Mm-hmm. And the older languages are very pictorial. Imaginative. And it seems like that's the way we're going. We've almost stopped imagining.
Yes, and we don't have a lot of reverence for things that were revealed or discovered, because now we've had them for so long that we think we can just make things happen.
Right.
Whether it's art or technology, we think that it's within our power, as if it's been that way from the start.
That's right. Yep. Yeah, we have stopped largely, as all these books, and particularly Obadiah, because this is all about God is going to keep his covenant to Israel, and Edom will be destroyed, but Israel will return. So, these first recipients would be those people, but this would also be something that was explored and thought of, because it's prophetic, in the temple, or not in the temple, but in the king's court. Right? These documents, we also don't want to lose sight of the fact that these documents are basically royal documents.
Yeah.
Right? They were held in high regard. They existed when there were kings in the king's library with the priests in the highest echelons of what is ancient Israel. So today you would want to read this in one of two ways. You would want to use your imagination to be one living in Israel or in a foreign land, because you've been driven, you're in fear of war or being conquered.
Right.
This is a yes, they'll do this. The locusts are coming, but Edom will be crushed for what they've done, for what they're going to do. So people who should have helped you, your cousins, they did not. They harmed you. And now you're looking for justice. Because God's will is that these enemies be judged, avenged. It's also a very real expression of the Abrahamic covenant continuing to be played out. So again, it's the covenant structure. Was Esau blessed to become a nation? Yes.
Sure.
Absolutely. And there was a blessing pronounced on him. So, but he wasn't the one who would continue in the mantle and the covenant in the line of Abraham.
Right, like Ishmael. He was blessed too, but he wasn't the one that the...
Another motif that repeats. Mm-hmm. The one whom you choose, the one whom you make by your own desire. In the view of your own eyes, you thought it was good, but it's not.
Right.
Neither Esau nor Ishmael were the better choice.
Right.
So, the book is very much up with God and down with man.
Right.
And again, that's a repeating theme, because at this point, Israel would be ruled by a horrid king, Ahab.
Right.
And Elijah would be fighting for the righteousness of the nation, for religious practices to be restored in the religious way that's appropriate. And then you have Obadiah saying he's heard from God, and this is all going to fall.
Right.
But Edom, you didn't protect us, and so now you'll be judged too. So the argument then is that Yahweh or the Lord or Hashem, the name, will bring retribution or judgment on Edom, because Edom reveled and participated in the destruction of Israel. So Israel's neighbors have been rough on Israel for a long time.
Yeah.
And this is one of the neighbors, even cousins. Yeah. And so, the folks in Gaza are cousins. Israelis are Arab descent. Mm-hmm. So, has it ever stopped?
Nope.
It's not going to, unfortunately, until
it does.
Until the Messiah comes back. Or comes, I suppose, depending on who you are. So, the purpose of this book is to be encouraged and to hope in the Lord, because he will avenge Edom's sin and restore Israel as a nation.
Yes.
So, I wanted to touch, I didn't necessarily agree with the how to read this one either, because I think looking at this from the ancient viewpoint is important, but it's not necessarily the only way.
Right.
It's kind of in tandem. So I think we ought to add in how the modern mind should look at these as well, and read these books. So
that would be fitting with the title.
Yes. The whole podcast. So it's important for us today as readers, all three of us in this room and the listeners to look real carefully at the repeating themes.
Right.
To begin to see patterns. They're in every single book.
Yes.
And it's even more pronounced as you get further down, because it's sort of a rolling history, let's say. So Edom is the result of Esau, and Esau's problems began in Genesis 25. So that's a great place to start. Do you understand it? Did you read through Exodus and find out that the people weren't allowed to pass?
Right.
Why weren't they allowed to pass? What's the kind of surrounding story and themes there? Because they're going to weigh in on Obadiah. And that's going to be true with the various runs. And I believe it's 1st and 2nd Chronicles is where the stories of Edom's problems are a little more explained. And so the way Israel and those two meet it's all there to look at and the stories to go through. And then when you come back to this, you'll have a little more context.
Right.
Good commentaries are important. More modern commentaries. The older the commentaries, the less, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say less accurate, more theological, spiritual, less data points, and kind of more reliable information in them, I would say.
Well, just in the archaeological discoveries in the last 50 years.
They're huge.
Huge.
Yeah.
And people being able to share information, if you have accuracy on something that I wouldn't have known about before if I couldn't contact you. So.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, that's important. So the key verse, Nick, you want to read that?
Yes. Obadiah 15, For the day of the Lord draws near on all the nations. As you have done, it will be done to you. Your dealings will return on your own head.
Yep. Prophecy. The day of the Lord. That's a loaded word. And that's another one of those things that it's a repeating theme.
Yeah, it comes up again and again.
It's a motif. And it's something that takes rather significant thought and study to kind of figure out. It appears that it's a prophetic term.
Right.
But it appears that it's a term that is fulfilled, but not totally fulfilled, numerous times.
Right.
Repeating motif. So, there's vengeance, violence, restoration, the link back to Esau, who became Edom, the link back to Jacob, Joseph, and Israel. It's important to compare and contrast the lines, especially when you get into prophets and judgments like this. So that's kind of the modern mind stuff to carefully think about, is what does it mean to be Israel? So why did Obadiah why was it written?
Right.
And what does it mean to be Edom? And how did the two not only separate and deviate from one another, but why is it now that this clash is so necessary?
Right.
And there's lots of history books and things to read as well that are outside of the Bible.
Oh, yeah.
That will give you much backstory and understanding. I don't really have anything during the time of Ahab to recommend. Have either of you?
Nothing.
During this time? Sorry, listener. I'll do some research next time so I can perhaps recommend some books or some resources in that way.
I was just trying to look up whether the word is pronounced retributive or retributive, and apparently you can say it either way.
Either way.
Yes.
Okay, so the law of retribution, that's an actual theological term. It's contained in the book. And Edom no longer exists and hasn't for a very long time. It's almost like the Bible might be true.
Right.
Almost like it.
Almost like it.
How many times have we ended on that note?
Nick, thanks for coming again.
My pleasure.
Appreciate
Good
you.
to be back.
Pastor Pete.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For having me.
And to the listener, we really appreciate you. And we wish you all the best. Oh, and it is Sukkot.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us. Come back soon.
Thank you for joining us for Modern Mind, Ancient Book. We hope that the time spent with us was valuable for you. It certainly was for us. Like Isabella said, please come back soon.